Welcome to our latest live about how do we lead and meet remotely in this pandemic world. I'm Ravi Tangri, and my guest today is Beverly Beuermann-King, who is a dear friend who's an expert on resilience. And what we want to get into today is why resilience now and growing the resilience both for you and your team is so critical. So welcome, Beverly. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Yeah. So could you give everyone a little bit of background on yourself and what you're bringing to the conversation here?
Awesome. Okay. So I am a stress and resiliency specialist, and I have been in business for 20 some odd years. Which is remarkable for me to even say that. But yes, for over 20 years, talking around stress, mental health, resiliency, and all the way out into kind of the more difficult areas around depression, anxiety, suicide. Right now is critical as far as I'm concerned, as far as mental health, and looking at where people are at and how that's impacting them, how leaders can help their teams through this time, and to bring that sense of hope and stability that people are really needing right now. Ravi, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, that's because I muted myself first.
There you go.
Yes, okay. I was going to thank you. That helps. I was saying, if you have comments, questions, input, please put them into the comments. If you're watching live, whether it's on YouTube or on my business page on Facebook. I've also started a watch party on my personal page, and I'm keeping an eye on the comments there on the other screen as well. So we can bring that into the conversation. If you've got insights, questions, anything else that you'd like to bring into the conversation, please do. So Beverly, you created an infographic that I think we can sort of use almost like to start things off as a table of contents for this conversation, right? Yeah. About employee needs. Oops, missed the sharing. Hang on, where are we? There we go. Employee needs during crisis. And the first thing, respect and appreciation. Tell me a bit about that.
When we look at employee needs just in general, even outside of the pandemic, that's one of the number one things that leaders can really focus on is respect and appreciation. So how are they saying thank you? How are, outside of the pandemic, it was things like, are you using social niceties? What are you doing for recognition as far as celebrations, anniversaries, all kinds of things. Even for, one particular company, what they did is they recognized family members. When an employee had to put in a lot of overtime, they actually sent notes to the family members to say thank you. Now it's even more important. We have people who are now running their team and their businesses are remote, and so that's now impeding on the personal space. And families are having to kind of dodge, and they're kind of having to share space, and doing that. And so for leaders, it really is about, how do you appreciate people? How do you let them know that this extra effort that they're putting in to run the business or to be part of the team or to keep things going is really being appreciated? We're seeing a ton of stuff happening around the healthcare right now, as far as recognition, and from the public. For me, that warms my heart, to be able to see people who are going out of their way to make people feel special. But we need to be doing that, in every industry. Every industry is trying to cope right now with the way things are. So as leaders, how are you saying thank you? How are you showing that appreciation? How are you letting people know that that extra step is being appreciated and welcomed?
I think back to before all this happened, one of our fellow speakers in America, and with a member of the NSA, he used to be the president of the Hearst Newspaper Corporation. And while he was running it, he increased, if I'm write the cash flow 100 times. And people asked the secret. And what he did was, this was before all the smartphones and all, but every week he would ask every one of his offices to send the name of someone who had done something exceptional and to him and what they had done. And he hand wrote a note to them, and he hand wrote a note to their spouse.
Absolutely.
And so when they came home, they were celebrated as well, right? And his employees would keep those notes.
Oh, for sure they're cherished. And I'm sure you and I have those little notes that we've received from our associations or from colleagues or things that have said thank you. So that appreciation goes a long way to letting people just know that the effort that they're putting out there is valuable and that it means something. And that's what that respect and appreciation is all about, is that it means something and that it's having an impact in some way.
Right. Now, here's a big one. Number 2 is, especially now when all the rules have changed, knowing what's expected of them, because quite often I think a lot of leaders don't know what to expect of people, because there's so much adaptation now to working online, and it just doesn't work the same.
It doesn't work the same. So part of what's expected is going to change. And for some teams I'm seeing where it's changing almost day by day, but at least week by week. So, what the expectations were in the first week, it was just about getting things like, let's get started. Let's, try to make this work. Now it's okay. So what's the rhythm? One of the stats that came out was that 50% are receiving more correspondence, so more emails and messages after hours than what they did before.
Really?
And
it was nuts before.
And it was nuts before. So we need to go back and say, because now that, people are working remotely, the business hours have changed and people are, you can work 24/7, but we need to get back to making sure that things like meetings and correspondence and all of those kinds of things happen in more of a contained area, so that people don't feel like they have to work 24 hours a day, just to stay caught up. So going back to some of the basic rules of team management, of how do we communicate, when do we communicate, what's expected. One of the things that I'm working with leaders on is in communication is making sure that people turn their video camera on when they're having their online meetings. We're conditioned to check in with people's faces. Right from day one, we look into somebody's eyes. And so, what are the expectations within the team of how we communicate, how we function, what processes can we let go? What things don't matter anymore? Because there's a lot of stuff that we have to say, okay, it was good then, not good now. What are the things that we have to do in this particular week? Because next week it's going to change again.
Right. And I mean, a lot of my focus now is, when you go to meeting online, first of all, the camera, right? Because we're conditioned with conference calls that what do you do when it's a conference call that's not your meeting? You put it on mute. Let's be honest here. Yeah. And you do other work and you sort of listen on the side. And then when they call your name, it's, oh. And it's like,
where's that button?
Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. Bull. You were muted and you were doing something else. And that's what we're conditioned to. So to be present, but also you can't have meetings the same way. There's, tell me if I'm wrong. The metaphor I have is like, when you're a teenager, you get really good at riding a bike, right? Like I remember I used to be able to ride my bike, no hands, and I could turn corners, whatever, without hands and all this,
and
right?
Cool. You had the cool thing.
Damn, I'm cool. and then you get behind the car. And everything you learned is gone behind the wheel, right? Because you're back to ground zero. And here it's the same thing, because you can't just present and be a talking head for an hour. People will go. Yeah. You have to change process, find new. So there's a whole learning, right, in terms of expectations.
And so the expectations of what do you have as expectations for me as a leader? What are my expectations for you as my team? What are the expectations between colleagues? And what are the expectations between your customers? some of, all of those things have changed. And it's just really about keeping the dynamic open, the conversation open, and being able to give people some leeway and some forgiveness, because we're going to screw it up. We're going to get it wrong. It's not going to be perfect. We're learning as we go, and to understand that everybody's learning as they go. So not to hold people to kind of this unrealistic expectation.
Right. And I mean, if, there's a couple of different types of challenges. If you've got kids, you're going to at some point have kids screaming or dogs running or whatever. But then there's also the people, what you said about the expanded office hours, people who are quarantining alone could tend to drift to working longer hours because they're just bored.
Yep, because there's nothing stopping me. I can't do my regular social activities. I can't go out and do my regular fitness regime, and doing it here in my apartment or in my bedroom or whatever. That sucks. So I don't really want to. So we need to, as far as expectations go and what's expected from each other, is just have those conversations. So, for one of the teams, it was really, I was checking in with the team members and just saying, okay, so like, what is it like and what are you doing? And, and then sharing some of those conversations with their leader to say, okay, like, these are some of the things that are red flags for me. And so addressing some of those red flags.
Okay. So now if we move forward, the next one, freedom to speak up, that people need to have that ability.
Yeah. Freedom to speak up and freedom from hostility, I think, kind of go together in some ways. So the freedom to say, I don't get it. I don't understand. I'm struggling right now. I'm not happy right now, or I'm really anxious right now. So the freedom to speak up is about so many things. It's about process. It's about emotions. It's about resiliency and capabilities at this time. And so some of those teams, that's a foreign concept, to be able to, to talk about how I'm feeling. And we need to be able to have those conversations so that we can do that checking, because some of the ways that we would normally check in with that person, we can't do. So how that person, is in the meeting, or how they're carrying themselves. It's harder to do when it's an online meeting. We're not seeing that person, at break time. We're not seeing that person at lunchtime necessarily. So, we need to be able to have those conversations and allow people to vent if they need to. It's okay for them to vent and say how this really sucks, and they're wishing it was the way it was, and to let people mourn and grieve so that we can then move forward. And so as a leader, that may be a really uncomfortable experience, and we need to get comfortable with that. The only question I had is, there's a need then, and this puts demand on leaders to maybe do more one-on-one video chats for these conversations, right? Yep, and it may be more the communication may be in so many different ways. It may be a one-on-one. It may be group meetings. It may be messenger. It may be a phone call. Like, there's going to be so many different ways that communication can happen and should happen, so that you can do those kind of check-ins. I think the other piece is, if you're especially if you're not the leader, is to be more open, more frank, more transparent. Not just about feelings, because that's a big part of it, but hey, this process is not working. What we did last week is not working this week, and things are falling through the crack. We need to problem solve. We need to figure this out in a different way. We need to let go of things, and to be invested enough in the success of yourself and the team to have those more difficult kind of conversations. And if somebody's not pulling their weight, or if they're not producing, or if they're not getting things done, to ask and say, is there something I can help you with? Is it an emotional block right now because you're overwhelmed, or is it a process thing? How can we make this work? And to have some of those more difficult conversations.
And the next one is, I think a little connected with that, is the freedom from hostility.
And I'm going to use a couple of examples. for me, what I'm normally talking about this are people that are in your IT department or in your, customer complaints department. People don't phone them up and going, "Oh my gosh, things are going so great. Like, my computer, it's doing so well." They get all of the complaints and they get dumped on. So how do you help those kind of teams deal with all of that negativity? Now we're getting that negativity bombarded from us in the media. Mm-hmm. And, even in our meetings, we talk about what are the problems, what are the things that are going wrong. And so that freedom from hostility needs to be, how do we protect those people who are getting the complaints? Like, how can we help them to vent that off or to buffer themselves against that? But even in the normal, how are we helping our teams? Are we encouraging them to buffer themselves against what's happening in the media, and what's happening globally, so that they're not connected to all of that stuff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, feeling that pressure, feeling that negativity? It's good to be informed. We have to be informed, but we need to also buffer ourselves against some of that negativity.
Right. And so a lot of these, how they talk about with leadership, you've got two roles. You've got the task and you've got relationship. Mm-hmm. And right now, these are really saying to me that we've got to put more emphasis on the relationship so that we can long-term do the task more, right? As we're...
Yeah. And it's going to ebb and flow, right? Because when this first started and people, business changed, it was task. Okay, so business continuity. How can we get this? How can we continue doing what we need to do, especially if we're going remote or we're locked down or we're at a skeleton staff? Now it's okay. So we've kind of come through that. We've got some of the processes in place. Now, how do we make sure people are okay? How do we make sure that they're, financially okay? How do we make sure that they're emotionally okay? How do we make sure that they are physically okay? And so now it is about that relationship piece.
So in that, the sense of belonging, how do we create a sense of belonging when we're, on a screen?
Mm-hmm. It's still, we still can do all of that. We can still have those conversations. I think one of the things is the sense of belonging is let it be okay to have fun. Let it be okay to have fun in your meetings and to be silly. When we, for you and I being speakers, we have icebreakers. If we're doing a half day as opposed to necessarily a keynote, even in conferences, there's things that break the ice. There's ways of doing that, that we have fun. We build that into our presentations. You need to do that in your online meetings as well. I've been into a couple where it was, one of them was, and it was Emily, who in our association, who did a wonderful job. She paired people off, and each of you had to pick an item. And, and she assigned one person, whoever was I'll make this up. I'm not exactly sure I can't remember, but whoever was the oldest, you had the problem, and whoever was the youngest in your partnership had the solution with your object. And you had to figure out how your object was a problem and how their object was the solution to it. And so you did it in the chat box. And so, Ravi and I would be chatting back and forth, and you could see people giggling. You could see people laughing and kind of, trying to hold up their object and go, okay, like they were trying to mimic and type and do all these things at the same time. And then you had to come back and say what you did. It was easy. One was, grab your favorite hat. And so you had to run really quickly. You had to leave the meeting, go find your favorite hat and put that on. And so then, that was things. So there's so many things that you can do, but to bring that humor. And when we're laughing together, when we're sharing together, not just the difficult stuff, but the fun stuff, that's how we belong. And that's how we feel like we're being cared for.
Yeah. And it's so easy now with Zoom, with the breakout groups and such, to do stuff like that. You don't even just have, people can actually go off in their little groups and have a huddle and come back. And
we're learning how to do that. 4 months ago, it was like there may have been the odd person who was using all of that. Now we're all having to figure that out and just make use of the tools that you have. And if you're not, maybe you have an older workforce and maybe they're not used to using the tools, work them in, get them to push buttons, get them, what's the worst thing in the world?
Create games.
Yep. Push buttons, do things. I've had one team, you mentioned games. They've foregone one of their meetings during the week, and it's a game night or a game day or a game hour or whatever you want to call it. They don't talk anything about business. They have little mini competitions, And that's the sense of belonging. So those things that we used to do in the workplace, we can be as creative. We just have to do it this way.
But also, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say one other thing that an association that I know is doing is that they are sending. So everybody on the board has to create a meme and then send that out. So they're assigned a week and they create that meme and they send it out. So there's lots of fun things that you can do.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen posts of you're on our national board of our professional association now. And I so wish we had video when I was on the board, because it's all we had was conference calls, right? And it's and we were paying attention, but it's so much longer when it's just audio versus it. And you've shared how much fun you guys have on those calls.
Yeah. And, that's where personality comes to life, right? Yeah. And so those connections, they fill our hearts, and that's how we feel that sense of belonging. And it matters when somebody's away, and we let people know, that it matters if they couldn't make that particular meeting.
Right. Cool. So from that, now leadership support, I've got some questions on you for this, but let you start that off with the leadership support. What is it that's needed from leaders now?
I don't know if there's one particular thing, and I'll get to a couple of things later on down the list, but I think it is about being we talk about being a supportive leader. So outside of this, it was, are you doing your daily check-ins? Are you, it's about being fair and equitable and trustworthy, and all of those words that we use, those still really matter. And so leadership support is being able to anticipate in some ways, but also when you can't, or when there's been a mistake, to take ownership for that, to say, hey, you know what, we're learning as we go, to not get upset when things don't go the way that they're supposed to do, to give people the slack, to also to provide a realistic picture, because for many people, we're making mountains out of molehills for everything. And not everything needs to be a mountain. There are some things that are just little things that we can get over. So for me, leadership support is showing up and being present, and then kind of going with the flow at that particular time. Yeah. Now,
the thing is, I mean, all of these things are the support that's needed from leaders, right? Yeah. Really, when you get to it. But what that says to me is that as a leader, you need to do your own work to work through your challenges. We've all been going through grief of losing the old normal. We've all had our reactions. And if you have a boss who is providing support to you, that's awesome. But if you're a business owner, or if you're a senior leader, you often don't have that coming yourself. That's what's needed of your people. So what that says to me is that we have to do our own work to process our emotional caca and reaction to this crazy world, so we can be there for our people, right?
Yeah, this is the time for leaders to reach out to each other, and so within a team, it's leader to leader support, business owner to business owner support. Who's in your mentor group, who's in your support group. It may be family members, or it may be colleagues that you've from associations, but this is the time to really work that out. The other thing, though, is that leaders need to be real. And so if they are upset, if they are frustrated, it's okay to say that and say, I don't have all the answers, and I don't know what we're going to do next. And let's talk about this and problem solve, because they don't have to put the pressure on themselves that they have to have it all figured out.
Right.
The idea is that we're coming together as a team to figure it out. And, we all know more people, more eyes on something, more brains thinking about something, the better chance we have of being able to solve those things.
Right. So, whoops, it is gone here. Where is the thing? Piece. So with the next piece, the necessary resources to get the job done. And part of that is what you touched on, that we don't really know what the necessary resources are. So the leaders got to say, I don't know. And how do we figure it out, right?
Yeah. Tell me what you need. I just read a report yesterday that came through that 31% of people are, you know, are saying that they don't have the resources to do an adequate job right now. So they're working remotely and they don't have the resources. So first of all, we need to speak up. We need to kind of problem solve what that's going to look like. But I have been amazed by the number of IT departments that kicked it into super high gear and got people working remotely very, very quickly. Now, what we may be seeing now is that the basics were there to begin with, but now they need more. Like there's more things that need to be done, and so it's going to be a continual process. And so a leader is going to be one who is asking, okay, like what else do you need to make this work? And I've seen one where one company sent chairs. They ordered office chairs to be delivered to their employees because they realized that their home ergonomics, no matter whether you're in the office or you're working at home, is still a big issue. And so if people are sitting on the floor and that's their office, or they're sitting on the bed because that's where they've been relegated to, we need to make sure that they have the right equipment, because if this is going on for months, we don't also want to be having back issues and neck strain and all of those things rippling out. So that's, for me, is also part of the resources. It's making sure that people are set up appropriately. Do they have the right files with them? Do they have the right printer connections and all of those things too? So that those little frustrations can be dealt with very quickly so that they can then focus the way that they need to focus.
Well, and part of those resources are also, how do you cope in this crazy world? How do you create balance? Why it's important to have some routine, to, pay some attention, at least to nutrition and exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, do they have access to, grocery and all of those kinds of things? But what other mental health resources do they have? So this is where it's really important that companies are promoting their EAP if they have one, their HR department if they have one, community resources. So know what's available in your community for people to dial into, especially, I mean, it may not be their mental health, but it may be the mental health of an elderly family member that they're dealing with, or a child who's really struggling. We have families who are dealing with special needs children who right now don't have the resources because everything has been shut down. So how can we know our employees and know our teams well enough to know what their struggles are so that we can help to connect them? You can be that connector to reach out and say, hey, have you thought about this, or have you tried this? And even something as simple as I created a graphic on, there's two of them right now. One is on feelings and that it's okay to feel, and one on control, what you can control and what you can't control. The comments and the responses from people on that, because sometimes it sounds logical, but people just need to know it, that it's okay. Yes. And so as leaders, just letting people know that it's okay, and here's some things that you can think about or try.
And if you send those to me, I'll pop those into the comments in this so people can access that. I know I've got one, but the other one. And the thing about figuring things out, I think that connects to ability to use their talents, because quite often when people were in the old world doing the job, they weren't bringing all of themselves in. They had other talents that aren't apparent, and now those may actually come to play.
Yeah, they may be the person that is great at figuring out, how to engage people online. They may be the new activity director within the team, right? Because they can do the little games, or they're great at the trivia. Setting up a couple of trivia games, and so some of those fun things can be part of it. They may have unique talents when it comes to processes. So now they can see things like before, maybe that wasn't their role, but now they have a really good view of how this can all be connected in a much different way than it was before. So, just not pigeonholing people, and looking for some of those unique things, and they may be completely unrelated to work. But how can you use that? Because that may be, if people are trying to maybe fill time. We have some teams that, they don't have a full day's worth of work, but they're still trying to keep it going. So maybe it is about having more fun or activities, or doing those things to kind of keep people moving forward.
Right. And I think back to when I was in the 90s, I did a lot of work when they had, with the military bases here in Canada, they downscaled them, cut them by 40, 50% sometimes, right? And then they were told, the people that left, the civilian workers on the base, they had to bid for their jobs against private sector firms to keep their jobs. Right? So there's like public sector jobs, and they had to bid for them now. So we're not in Kansas anymore, right? And so I worked with them to help with a number of bases to help them, you know, do the innovative redesign and such. And I remember there's one base, Greenwood, that I worked with where one of the carpenters happened to be the head of the volunteer fire department in the nearby town. And he came up with breakthrough ideas to reinvent how emergency services were run that no one had ever applied. But he was a carpenter, right? So it's all of these skills that people have that you don't know that may be coming to play, because there may be someone who loves tech that can help bring everyone up to speed with tech. There may be someone, like say, who can be, how do we have the fun days when we get together, and they can be the champion of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, being aware of who's on your team and knowing them well enough to know when they're doing well, know them well enough when they're not doing so well, know what some of their, what gets them going in the morning, like what jazzes them up, and what are some of the things that demotivate them. And when you know those kinds of things, it makes it so much easier as a leader to respond, because now you can use that background to be able to kind of see where your team is at.
Right. So now this next one, periods of calm. I'm intrigued by that.
And that's a tough one. It was a tough one before. It's even tougher now. But I was laughing this morning because I can remember not that long ago going, I wish I could just have a couple of weeks with nothing in it so that I could get things done.
Surprise.
And surprise. But I haven't had the moments of calm yet, because I had a bunch of stuff that I need to get done. So it was like boom, 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 boom. Okay. And so I can actually see where I'm going to have some moments next week. And I think as leaders, we need to help our teams go, even if it's crazy busy and really reactive right now, you need to be able to give them permission to say, you gotta take some time for yourself. Like self-care still during this time has to be priority, so that people don't burn out. And so how do you give them that permission to take that time? And I'm not talking about hours and days of calm. I'm talking about moments. Like, are they still, taking a lunch break and getting up and getting moving and going out for a walk? Are they shutting it down at some point at the end of the day where there's like an official shutdown, not where it just kind of keeps on going and I keep answering messages throughout the day? So are they setting themselves up for success, or are they setting themselves up for burnout?
Yeah. Now the interesting thing there is, we were talking just before we came on. It's like some of us are getting Zoom burnout. Oh my God, I'm having one after the other after the other. You do need some breaks from that, and we don't want to go back to. I think there's a real opportunity here where I think in our business world we had meetingitis. We had meetings that really didn't do a lot, but we still had them, which ate up time for people to actually do work. And I think we've got an opportunity here. There's a disruption to say, do we need to, versus jumping online to the virtual meetings.
So I think there's a real balance, because we're in, physical distancing and people are feeling socially disconnected. So meetings for me fills that gap. And so it doesn't necessarily have to have a full agenda other than check in and, what are some of the top issues. It may seem like a waste, but that social connection for me is critical. But I think you're right. We did have a lot of wasted meeting time. And so now it's, people have kind of swung the other way. I can work and work and work and work and work, but there's nothing stopping me from, because usually, we've got the 2 o'clock meeting and the 3 o'clock meeting. So I'm getting things done in chunks. Now I can work in bigger chunks, and I'm not taking my breaks, and I'm not taking care of myself. So we have to find balance. And I think a lot of these things are throwing a lot of question to things. And it's also about, okay, so I like this pace. You know, for some people, it's, I like the pace that things are going, and it feels good when I am taking that walk in the middle of the day. Okay, so how do I, you know, when we get back to doing things in a different way again, how do I make sure I hold on to some of those things that are working well, that were good for my mental health, that were good for my creativity, that were good for my productivity, and let go of some of the bad habits that maybe I had. You know, I've talked to a lot of people who were not sleeping well before.
Yes.
You know, they may not be sleeping well now because they're you know, there's some people who are not sleeping well now because they're worried, but for some people, they've slowed the pace down now where they're actually not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get work done. They're now getting a good night's sleep, and they're feeling better, and it's making such a difference on their productivity. And so those are the things we want to hang on to.
And the thing is, we want to recapture the time that, you know, you may have been spending hours a day in commute. Don't convert that to work time. Right? Don't switch that directly to work. Now, I love the last point on here, hope. So how do we engender hope with our people?
You know, hope for me, so I've been talking about this a little bit more, and I've got a video coming out next week on this, that the difference between whimsical hope and strategic hope.
Okay.
And so for me, whimsical hope is like, you know, hey, wishing for unicorns to, you know, show up in my backyard. You know, it's kind of like those birthday wishes that we talk about. And, you know, it's those ideas that maybe you want to latch onto, but they don't really do anything for us. And hope for me is strategic hope. It's problem solving. It's being able to rely on the people around me. It's about moving myself forward. And so as leaders, one of the things that we can do is to provide that hope. It's to give that picture of, hey, we've been through tough things before and we can get through them. These are the skills. This is the, you know, these are the things about you guys that I really, really appreciate that have helped us before. And let's hold on to those things. It's to give people the hope that things are going to be okay. You know, we're doing the best that we can, and we're going to get through this. It's not a way out there thing. These are the reasons why I believe that we're going to be okay. And providing that hope for people, and providing that picture, and that problem solving, that kind of light to shine in front of people is really, I think, one of the strongest things. All those other things need to be done, but right now, giving people hope, I think, is the number one thing that we can do to help people survive and to help them with their mental health, something to latch onto.
Yeah, I mean, the mental health, honestly, is a significant issue, because even before this, you know, what was it? The stats were that nearly a third of people had suffered from mental health challenges. Yeah. So you add this to the mix, and it's going to exacerbate those, plus bring a few other challenges for other people.
Yeah, it's, you know, yesterday's research came out saying that, you know, 81% are having difficulty right now because of the pandemic, mental health issues because of the pandemic. That's huge. You know, and we're talking about the pandemic, but one of the other things that I've been really starting to research and look at is what they're going to call the echo pandemic. And the echo is the mental health side of this, that there are going to be really severe repercussions for people in 6 months and 8 months, a year from now, residual impact because of this pandemic. And it can be everything from anxiety and a lack of trust for being out in public and taking transit and being in crowds, to you know, some leaders are not going to handle this well, and so now there's going to be a lack of trust and anxiety. There's going to be burnout, and people are going to be feeling the kind of the echo effect with depression.
Yes.
And so we need to be able to give people strategies around mental health. How do you cope during this time? We need to be able to give people hope, and hope is actually one of the, you know, biggest predictors of our mental health. And so being able to be able to do that. I'm going to touch on one more little piece around that hope, and that is gratitude.
Yes. And
gratitude is the number one predictor of our happiness. So we need to be able to, you know, help people to be grateful grateful for how far we've come, what we've achieved, how we're managing through this, what is good, because there's still lots of good things that are going on, and to celebrate those kinds of good things.
And I think that's, that's the nurturing that people are hungering for, and for our leaders, that's, as you said, I think that's the greatest thing we can give. It's, yes, there's a task and all of this, but when, the reality is we're not going to get things done in the same pace that we have. Projects are falling apart, but we need to nurture our people so that they will get there. And the echo boom you're talking about, one of the things I've heard is that there's going to be, PTSD even with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's, we talk about our healthcare workers and their mental health right now. They're getting through, and they're on survival mode right now, but the impact of that is going to be huge. And so we need to be making sure that we're checking in and being kind and understanding that people are going to need these resources. So companies right now need to be really investing in mental health of their teams, but also looking ahead as to, okay, what else can we be doing? And are our benefits going to be there to be able to help them? Or do we have the counselors available to be able to listen to some of these things, and getting that in place now, and making sure that people know about the resources that are available to them.
Right. And I think a perfect place to sort of wrap this up is the quote that you have at the end from Eleanor Roosevelt. I absolutely love that. To handle yourself, use your head. To handle others, use your heart.
It is about heart-centered, isn't it? It is. We are a connected race, and this has reinforced that in so many ways, that we need to reach out and be connected. And heart-centered is how we forgive. Heart-centered is how we create. Heart-centered is how we support each other. And so for leaders, it is the time. We are in the era now where we have to be in touch with that heart. And, before we weren't, and now we have to be. And I think that that's going to have such a positive effect moving forward. If I can predict one of the good things that's going to happen, this would be one of the good things that's going to happen as we move forward.
Right. So, Beverly, can you let people know how they can get a hold of you if they want to, and what sort of work it is that you do if they're curious?
Okay, so my website there is worksmartlivesmart.com. I work with teams and leaders to find ways of being more resilient. So whether that's personal strategies or workplace wellness strategies. I'm doing a lot of webinars right now because the in-person stuff is not there, but I do the in-person stuff when that's allowed. And you can connect with me through Facebook. You can connect with me, especially through LinkedIn. That's where I post a lot of information and strategies and tips. And you can email me directly at info@worksmartlivesmart.com if you have particular questions or ideas that you want to share.
Okay, and actually for LinkedIn, we're not able to stream directly to LinkedIn, but there's a group that I've set up where I'm putting these videos about leading and meeting in a pandemic. So I'll introduce you to that, Beverly, and I'll tag you in that so people can connect with you there. This is the group, or just search for leading and meeting in a pandemic. You should be able to find it. Also, this is streaming to my page on YouTube as well. So if you want to track there, and you'll be able to get these resources there for you as we find our way forward, both in terms of leadership, but also in terms of leading yourself personally. How do you support yourself? So thank you so much, Beverly, for joining me. This has been an absolute delight.
I thoroughly adore you, Ravi, and I hope you know that. And I want to say that you are one of my supporters, and so I want you to know that how much I appreciate you for that.
Well, you are same back at you, my dear. Send you virtual hugs.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Thank you all, and we will see you soon with another live stream on how do you lead and meet in this pandemic. Bye-bye.
Awesome.